Have you ever wondered what silence tastes like? Not the quiet in a room, but the quiet in water, the kind of quiet that only shows itself when everything else steps aside. To most people, water is nothing more than nothing. To me, water has accents, moods, and habits. I don't mean the splash from a pool or the sting of seawater. This is about bottle cap still water, the cleanest version the average person can get on command. I can tell brands apart. I can tell when a bottle's been open for 20 minutes versus 2 hours. I can pick out the taste of a fridge shelf, the hint of plastic that clings after a bottle rides around in a warm car, and that odd chalky shadow that shows up when a cap isn't sealed perfectly the first time. It's not a superpower, just a weird compass I learned to trust. It started as a party trick, then became a private security system. When everything is normal, water tastes empty. When something's off, emptiness gets crowded. Sometimes it's a penny taste, sometimes a sweet fuzz, sometimes an echo, like the aftersound of a bell only in the mouth. I never told anyone, not my friends, not my family, not even Myra, my wife. She liked to tease that I was picky with food. Little did she know how much more particular I was with water. A year ago, Myra began bringing home little squeeze bottles that promised flavor without ice, citrus sparkle, tropical breeze. The marketing had a way of making plain sound like a moral failure. She squirted them into her glasses at dinner, and one night into my bottle when she thought I wasn't looking. I took a sip, kept a straight face, and swallowed. Imagine the faint aftertaste of a candy wrapper that was never quite licked clean. That's how it felt. I smiled and said I'd stick to pure. She shrugged and said I was no fun. She wasn't wrong. But the squeezes kept coming. One in a gym bottle I left by the entry bench, one in a cooler during a picnic, one I found half mixed in the fridge with condensation like sweat. I never made a scene, never scolded, never kept score. When she turned, I swapped it out for a sealed bottle from my stash, one I kept where the holiday lights used to live. I didn't make a rule. I just quietly kept my emptiness empty. A month later, we hosted our street's spring potluck, grills smoking, kids chalking the driveway with galaxies, neighbors balancing paper plates like tiny planets. I was stationed by the smoker, tending ribs and corn. Myra floated among guests, refilling cups, laughing with an ease that always made rooms feel warmer. She walked over with a chilled bottle under a napkin, set it in my hand, and squeezed my shoulder. I twisted the cap. The hiss didn't sound right, more like a sigh after someone had already breathed it. I raised it to my lips and paused. Here's the thing about water. When it's wrong, it begins with a whisper. This one felt like loose change rubbed between fingers. A whisper of metal, faint as memory. Underneath it, a bitterness that didn't belong to minerals or plastic or a lazy filter. An extra hum, not loud but persistent, like something floral that got lost and turned mean. The emptiness was occupied. I didn't swallow. I pretended to check the propane tank and let the sip fall to the concrete, where it joined the evening one breath at a time. When I straightened, I scanned the yard without turning my head. Conversations in bright pieces. A neighbor's dog nosing the grill leg. Myra, across the patio, perched on a chaise beside Aaron from her office, who had recently become a fixture at our gatherings without exactly becoming a friend. He waved lazily, like he'd been there 100 times. Myra followed my eyes, smiled a small smile, and raised her glass. I tucked the bottle between the spare propane tanks and flipped corn that was already perfect. Somewhere inside me, a small hinge clicked shut. I let the ribs rest and went inside for more napkins, which was true, but not the point. In the pantry, behind the cereal bins, behind the bag of rice that never seems to get smaller, was my stash. 6 glass bottles with paper seals like quiet promises. I picked one up. The paper had a wrinkle that didn't belong. I ran a thumb along the edge. The seal gave a sound closer to peel than tear. I unscrewed. I sniffed. That same whisper, coin and floral bitter, a sweetness that felt like a lie. Emptiness, crowded. Myra slid into the doorway in a dress that always made me forget what I was doing. "Need a hand?" she asked. There was a playful edge, the kind she used when a room had too much seriousness. "Just grabbing napkins," I said. "This one tastes odd, maybe a bad batch." She tilted her head and smiled like the situation was a puppy that peed on the rug. "It's probably the barbecue smoke," she said, stepping closer. "Or your mouth still remembers the rub." She took the bottle from my hand, capped it, and pressed it back into my palm. "You worry too much." She kissed my cheek and floated away with the napkins. I stood alone, listening to the house breathe. The air was cool and smelled like onions. Out back, someone whooped, the kind of sound that says the night is going better than expected. I held the bottle, felt its coolness move into my skin, and tried to recall every time I'd ignored a small warning. Eventually, warnings stop whispering. They start to sing. I wasn't looking for secrets, only quiet. I walked the long way to the side hall, past the coat hooks and the framed photo of us at the lake, where the sky had been a single, impossible blue. I stepped along the hallway runner and paused near the bedroom door, which was open enough to make closing it seem rude. Voices came from the bathroom, not loud, not careful either. "It doesn't hit the same for everyone," a man's voice said, Aaron, steady and excited at once. "Some feel it in minutes, others take longer." There was the rustle of fabric, a laugh that didn't belong to strangers or to jokes. "You promised me tonight," Myra said, low and sharp. "I'm tired of waiting for timing and windows and alibis." He answered with a smile in his words. "The last thing we need is patience running out in the worst way. Let the evening burn down. There's time." Silence, then soft laughter, then a sentence that used the word right next to him in a way that made the hallway feel smaller. "When the body goes very still, the world gets louder. Plumbing, air vents, the faint tick of the thermostat." I stared at the ridge in the runner where people always catch their shoe. I mapped the distance from this door to the back gate, to the street, to the place where cars get left without thinking. I put my palm on the wall. It felt cool and honest. Nothing hid inside it. I left by the side door, crossed the lawn, and sat on the front steps beneath the old porch light that flickers like it dreams. The potluck hummed behind me, friendly, oblivious. The bottle sat in my hand, shivering slightly because my hand did. I turned it, watched the glass turn the porch light into a thin halo. Emptiness crowded. Whisper, coin, floral, lie. A room inside me opened that I didn't know I had, and inside it was a chair, and on the chair was a decision. I stood. I walked back into the house with a normal face. People asked about the rub. Someone needed foil. I said I was running out for more ice and also beer, because ice alone invites questions. Myra touched my elbow and searched my face like a locksmith. "You okay to drive?" she asked, soft and careful. "Only had water," I said, lifting the bottle like a flag that means everything and nothing. She nodded, the way someone nods when a plan survives a test. I kissed her cheek because habit is heavier than air. In the garage, the door lowered like a lid. The room became its own weather. I set the bottle on the workbench and stared at it until the label stopped being letters and turned into shapes. I am not a chemist. I am not a detective. I am a person who knows what water should not taste like. That was enough. I opened the drawer where things get put because they might be useful. Rubber bands, dead batteries, a funnel. I poured out half the bottle into an old measuring cup stained by tomato sauce. I topped it with sink water, capped it, shook it. The whisper didn't change. The crowd inside the emptiness remained. I drove, not fast, not slow, past the park where the swings hang still at night, past the corner deli with their eternal cash-only sign taped to the door. A thought rode shotgun. Sometimes, when things are poisoned, the only way out is down. Years ago, my aunt kept a brown glass bottle in a high cabinet and called it the nastiest miracle. She threatened it when kids stuffed marbles in their mouths. I remembered the label only as an ugly word that made your tongue fold. Ipecac. It was a promise that if something shouldn't be inside you, it wouldn't be for long. The late-night pharmacy had the bluest light I've ever seen. I walked in with a script in my head that didn't ask questions. "Stomach upset," I said. "Need something strong." The clerk pointed to the aisle where remedies pretend to be neutral. There it was. A small brown bottle with a white cap, a word that sounded like a cough. I paid, walked back to the car, opened my water and tipped a measure of the syrup in. The smell hit like wet bark and regret. I took a tiny sip to test my nerve and gag reflex in the same moment. The world leaned. I waited. 10 steps into the liquor store for the ice and the proof of errand, my stomach revolted with perfect clarity. Knees, tile, voices, a hand on my back that belonged to a stranger who said breathe, like a verb could be a ladder. Sirens are loud even when they mean well. The bright box of the ambulance swallowed me whole and fed me to an emergency room where ceilings have constellations only sleepless people learn. A doctor with day-old eyes asked careful questions while a police officer with a notepad asked firmer ones. They did not treat me like a liar. They treated me like a body with a clock inside. Time passed in metallic blinks. When language returned to my mouth, they explained, with a gentle bluntness, that whatever borrowed my water had teeth. They named things with syllables that don't belong in kitchens. One could make the mind quiet in minutes. One could turn the heart into a stubborn stone drum. One could pull strings on the rhythm humans count on without knowing. In combinations, bad becomes calculus. And if the stomach doesn't return the gift quickly enough, the rest of the body has to learn the wrong lessons fast. They said my choice, to make my body reject everything, likely pulled me back from a line I didn't see but was sprinting toward. They said some people don't get a warning. I said nothing. Words are shy when the room is bright. Mornings in hospitals smell like new paper. A nurse brought ice chips like clear coins. The officer returned with the kind of patience that knows it's not actually patience. He asked about bottles and parties and who kept handing me kindness with caps on. I did not indict. I told the shape of a night and let the outline accuse itself. In stories, villains confess. In life, they argue with shadows until the shadows decide they've had enough. News travels badly and still gets where it's going. By early afternoon, I learned there had been a scene in my own backyard, a spectacle staged by two people who forgot the crowd could hear. Words like, "Are you insane?" and "You were supposed to wait," untied themselves from decorum and flew across the pool. Neighbors don't miss much. Some pick up a phone instead of a paper plate. The police walked in the back gate with the casual confidence of people who make doors behave. Things after that moved with logic's heavy stride. There are tests that find whispers on breath and in blood, fingerprints of choices people hoped would wash away in a sink. There are interviews where charm wears out faster than truth. There are rooms where one person waits in a metal chair and realizes silence can be louder than a siren. Consequences showed up like a tide. Names were put on papers. Papers were put in front of judges. The law is not a story, but it knows stories end. When the paperwork grows too tall, life shrinks to fit under it. We divided not just property but weather. Who gets which holidays, who keeps the chairs that never matched, who becomes a ghost in which room. Myra and I didn't speak much. When we did, our voices borrowed the tone people use at information desks. An attorney you could trust with your last pair of shoes said phrases that sounded like bridges and then like farewell. The case didn't become an epic, it became a file. Files have edges that cut when you try to hold too many at once. Friends visited the hospital and practiced the art of saying the right thing to someone who almost didn't get to hear it. "You're lucky," one said, and then apologized because luck felt like the wrong word. "You're stubborn," another said, meaning it as a compliment. I kept wanting water and kept sending the little paper cup away untouched. The nurse said hydration matters. I said it does. My mouth said nothing. The taste of emptiness had learned a new story, and every sip read it aloud. When I went home, the house had been cleaned by kind strangers who respect drawers more than their owners do. The pantry felt haunted by the way the light fell. I stood at the sink and ran the tap, letting it flow just to hear the sound, not to drink. I lined new bottles on the counter and stared at their caps like eyes. The label glue seemed brand new, the kind that doesn't believe in failure. It took me 30 minutes to uncap one. It took me an hour to bring it near my mouth. It took me 2 seconds to stop. people say to move on, as if motion alone is the medicine. I did move, through days full of normal errands, through evenings that pretended they were ordinary, through nights where memory wore loud shoes. Sometimes I dreamt of that first whisper. Coin, bitter, floral, lie. Sometimes I woke up with my tongue arguing with the dark. Sometimes I stood in the kitchen at 3 a.m. and listened to the fridge hum like it was trying to soothe me. Healing is not a staircase. It's a hallway with too many doors and no map. Some mornings, coffee tasted like promise. Some afternoons, water tasted like a dare. I learned little rituals: tap the cap twice, hold the bottle up to the light, let the first sip touch the lip and not the tongue, pause, breathe, decide. Even then, memory would try to sit at the table and eat what wasn't served. Therapists ask good questions like locksmiths. We talked about trust as if it were a bird that flew in and out at will. We talked about how senses remember storms longer than skies do. They said trauma teaches the body to overlearn patterns because the cost of underlearning is too high. They didn't try to fix my water. They helped me make peace with the fact that vigilance isn't a flaw when it keeps hearts beating. I left those sessions with the surprising relief of being told that sometimes caution is the correct taste. After a while, the world began to taste like itself again. Not always, not predictably, but often enough to keep going. I met friends at a park and drank from a fountain because the sun insisted. I kept a small journal of bottles and brands, not because evidence was needed, but because rituals are oars on still water. There were days I forgot to be afraid, and on those days I drank without ceremony and tasted nothing at all. The perfect absence that first taught me everything. If there's a lesson, it is not complicated. The body is a storyteller. It tells the truth in early drafts, whispers, hums, hints, long before the plot reveals itself. Listen to small warnings. They are not drama, they are doorbells. A strange taste, a wrong hiss, a cap that peels instead of tears. These are footnotes from a future trying to help the present survive. The night that turned the world bright and loud began with the quietest note I almost ignored. I won't ignore it again. Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more new stories every single day. Take care of yourselves and each other. And if the water ever tastes like something that doesn't have a name, pause, let the body speak. Then decide.